Hey guys, it's Graham. What's crackin'? We are talking tonight about Calvin and Hobbes and Bill Watterson. I ran a Twitter poll and asked some people online. This seemed to be the subject that they were most interested in. I've been meaning to do this video for a while, but for the last month, I've been getting used to my new schedule at work. I'm on the night shift now. The pay is better, the hours suck. But such is the life of a trucker. It's scratched a lot of itches that needed scratching, and so with that one concession, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. And now that my schedule is kind of normalized, hopefully I can get better into the rhythm of making stuff for you. So, Bill Watterson, Calvin and Hobbes. This was my favorite of the Sunday funnies when I was a kid growing up. Maybe because I found a kindred spirit in the mischievous little child Calvin. He had an imagination that took him out of class and took him out of his chores and took him out of conversations with his parents and just sent him a million miles away to another planet where he was a spaceman or he had superpowers or he was running away from tyrannosaurs or whatever. Like, my brain did that, and I identified hard with that little kid and his imaginary tiger friend. And then out of nowhere one day, I pull open the Sunday comics and Calvin and Hobbes is not the top front and center comic, and I didn't understand why. Sometimes they change the publication order or they put something else in, and I'm like, okay, well, it'll be back. And then the week stretched on and it never came back. I remember asking my dad about it, and he just said, no, it's done. He finished it. He's not doing it anymore. And that blew my mind. This was the 90s. Charlie Brown had been going since my dad was a little kid. I just figured that all comics did that. Well, no, there's a lot more to the story. Years and years went by, and eventually, I continued reading other comics. As I grew up, I read other books, and I was predominantly a fiction consumer for, my teens and my 20s, and it wasn't until I got married and became a serious man and started reading more nonfiction. Well, in 2019, I read David Michaelis's biography of Charles Schulz, and it was just life-changing, just beautiful book. And it made me want to read more cartoonist bios, and so naturally the next one to seek out was one on Bill Watterson. Come to find out, the guy is pretty reclusive, we'll say. I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. He just doesn't grant interviews, doesn't sit down with biographers, doesn't go on camera, doesn't go online, any of that. So it's hard to really write about him just because he has complete control over his own time and his own work. Fortunately, writer Nevin Martell did enough research on the comic itself and the people who worked with Watterson that he was able to write this book, Looking for Calvin and Hobbes. And so I picked up a copy of that, read through it, and while it didn't give me a complete picture of Watterson's life, it told his life as it relates to the comic Calvin and Hobbes, and that was the real core of my interest anyway. It talks about how he went to a college, can't remember the name of it, but he went and studied art, and in his dorm room, his senior year would sit up on a scaffolding and kind of paint on the ceiling the way that David did, or Michelangelo did with the Sistine Chapel. That was his thing. And then he worked as an artist until this little cartoon strip idea that he had got picked up in the mid '80s, and he signed a contract with a syndicate that would last about 6 years. And he drew, a black and white daily strip and then the full color Sunday strip. That was kind of the standard gag of the time. And this thing just took off. People loved it. The next step naturally would be to sign merchandising contracts. People would want plushies or apparel or what have you. But Bill Watterson didn't do that. He legitimately has $1 billion of integrity because he never licensed his work out for anything other than a 2-year run of calendars, 12-month calendars where he put his art out on there. I don't know if you could even find those now, even if they were old beat up used ones from the 80s, but yeah, he never let his stuff exist in any format other than the one that he created. even if little kids were writing in and begging, like, please, I want a Hobbes plushie, go buy a stuffed tiger, I don't care. Not that he was rude to him, but that was his vision for his work, and he could not be tempted by money or by any other influence to deviate from that vision. And that is a level of integrity, I think, that I don't see among anybody, let alone other creatives. I mean, we all want to merchandise our work, right? I mean, I've been publishing for almost 10 years, and I think the single most amount of money I made on one thing was a couple $100 for a short story. We're dying here. Hey, this is why I'm on the night shift as a trucker. It's because something's got to pay the bills. I write fiction to deal with my mental illness, but no, that's something else entirely. Anyway, Nevin Martell's book, totally awesome, talks about the history of the cartoon. One thing that I found especially interesting was that as the first contract came to a close, and it came time to negotiate with the syndicate for the second one, he knew they were going to want to push for merchandising and licensing and all that stuff. He was going to hold fast and say no. He wanted a pay increase, but he also wanted other concessions, the first of which, and probably the biggest of which, was a 9-month sabbatical. He was going to take 9 months off and just piss off to the mountains and go fishing or do whatever. This was something that my mentor John Watson described as refilling the well. He had to constantly be refilling the well, and for, say you're an intellectual or a teacher or something, that's usually going to involve a lot of reading, a lot of studying. Maybe you go back to school briefly or something. For him, it was the touch grass of it all. He needed to be in touch with the things that inspired him to create his art in the first place. That involved keeping a firm grip on his sense of wonder and imagination and the things that kept him creatively young, we'll say. The older we get, the more removed we become from the childlike imagination that we once had. And that was the seed and the core of the Calvin and Hobbes comic. If he let that shrivel up and die, then the real heart of the thing was going to die with it. So he took that 9-month sabbatical. He came back at the end of it, started drawing new stuff. They just ran kind of reruns the way that they do now. And it was just a banger of a success. And then he drew the final comic at the beginning, I think, of 1995. And that was it. It was Calvin and Hobbes running off into the woods, not one last time, but yet again, we'll say. Like, that was all they did. Let's go have an adventure. And the beauty of that is that, those of us that grew up with it, and those of us that are discovering it late, whoever it is, we can kind of rest assured that Calvin and Hobbes are still out there having adventures, and we can too. We're not limited by the fact that we were once 8 and now we are 38, and we've got to set that aside. C.S. Lewis has a lot of famous quotes about, being adult enough to still believe in fairy tales. I feel like Bill Watterson his work has kind of a spiritual kinship to that. So Nevin Martell, despite his best efforts, was never able to sit down and have any kind of discussion with Watterson for this book. Many reporters have descended upon Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and tried, but you cannot force this man to do anything with his time or his efforts that he does not want to do. And that is a level of control that he has over his own life that I envy greatly. He did come out of, I don't want to say his shell or out of hiding, but he did come out of his own sphere and kind of into the public sphere briefly, twice that I know of in the last 10 years or so. Once was when he had some correspondence with cartoonist Stephen Pastis, who draws the Pearls Before Swine comic, and famously drew, I think, 3 days worth of strips for his comic. The gag was that the cartoon version of Stephen Pastis that appears in Pearls Before Swine was, arguing with a 5-year-old girl or something, and she said that she could draw his comic better than he could, and what she drew was actually strips drawn by Bill Watterson, in the very recognizable Calvin and Hobbes style. And he had some blog posts to write about that were just wonderful. And close to that same time, a documentary about Sunday comics and cartoon strips came out called Stripped. I can't remember who produced it. I know that it was on Netflix. I watched it there back when I had Netflix. And they made a big deal about the fact that Bill Watterson was going to be a contributor to this documentary briefly. And in fact, he was allowing his voice to be recorded over a phone call for the first time in who knew how long, maybe ever, and, to share his insights and his opinions and thoughts on the medium. Other than that, he went back to doing whatever it was he wanted to do, whether it was maybe working on watercolors or drawing something else. Again, he controls his own life. There's still complete sets of the Calvin and Hobbes comic that fly off the shelves every year. And, if that's his bread and butter, then, I salute him. We should all be so lucky to have this one identifiable work that keeps paying the bills decade after decade. The reason I'm doing this video now, because it's been a few years since I read Martel's book, and I've been reading this collection since I bought it in 2017. I still pull it out every once in a while and flip through a few of them with my sons. I was cruising around on Amazon a couple of weeks ago, and I saw that he's actually got another book coming out. I forget who the co-author is. It's a collaboration called The Mysteries. It looks like the art style is very different from what he's doing here. I'm going to throw a picture up there for you. Oh, hey, look, there's my wife. It's kind of like a medieval fable horror story, gothic looking thing. It's kind of hard to sum it all up. I've seen a few of the sample pages, but really I'm not digging too deep into it. I have enough confidence in his work as a creator, as an artist, that if he's going to try something in a new genre or in a new vein, I just want to approach it kind of, what's the word that I'm looking for here? Like unpersuaded by anything else. Just go into it clean, go into it from zero and say, okay, what is my experience reading this, looking through this, consuming this, and see what that's like. It comes out in October, so I smashed the pre-order button on that one pretty quickly. And when that gets here, I'll do a review of it. But he's still out there. He's still doing whatever he wants to do. And, he's not like some of these other artists that sell their rights away and then complain when somebody does something with it that they don't like. One particular example that comes to mind is, I think Alan Moore, the creator of Watchmen, sold the rights and then hated what they did with the movie. And I thought, well, weren't you able to retain some kind of say over that? If you're not, but you still sold it, then you kind of had to be prepared for that. That's the unfortunate thing about film adaptations, is it's going to be put in the hands of somebody that largely probably won't care about your vision for it. But anyway, I'm like every other indie artist that I know, I'm working my way towards trying to achieve what Bill Watterson achieved with his first and only major public work. If you guys are unfamiliar with any of my writings, I would recommend that you check out the Engines of Liberty series, which will be on Amazon. You can find it in paperback and Kindle format. At an undetermined date, I'm going to put together a hardcover omnibus for all three. It's going to take some time because I've got to go through and touch up the artwork digitally. I've gotten 10 years better at art since then, and some of those pieces are, if I were to do it all again now, I would not have put them in there. But I knew going into it that my skills were going to improve over time. I just wanted to do the best that I could in 2013 and 2014 and publish it. So I would recommend checking out the Engines of Liberty series, because later this year, in fact, not long after this new Bill Watterson book comes out, a fourth book in that world is going to hit shelves. It's not necessarily in the Engines of Liberty series. It takes place 50 years after, and it deals with a whole new set of characters. It's just set in that same world. It's a story idea that I'm very excited about. It's a mechanized race down the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia with magic and monsters and all that stuff. This is an idea that I've wanted to tackle for a while. I'm finally getting after it, and I've got a very colorful roster of characters that I'm excited about, and I think you guys are going to like it. I'm going through edits right now on the manuscript, and then in the coming weeks I'll start on the artwork, and that'll take me all summer to get that ready, and then it'll launch hopefully in October, but I haven't set a hard date on it yet, just because who knows what life's going to throw at me. In the meantime, if you guys want to be part of the effort to help get me out of the truck, check out crackerstack.substack.com. I use Substack instead of Patreon because you can still like back me on there. You can subscribe. You can be a free subscriber or you can be a paid subscriber. And there is some paywalled content, so that if you pay, I'm giving you a little bit of extra stuff. Mostly I do book reviews there. I do also write for upstreamreviews.com, but that's a very specific niche there. We review independent sci-fi, fantasy, fiction, all that stuff. But on the Cracker Stack, the book reviews that I do are pretty much anything and everything that I'm reading, nonfiction, comics, or what have you. And with that paid subscription you get there, like I said, you'll get some paywalled content. I'm currently doing a reread of Pierce Brown's Red Rising series because the 6th one is coming out in July. And I loved the first 3. I was ambivalent on book 4, and I really hated book 5. And I'm hoping against hope that he's able to pull out a course correction with book 6. It's been 4 years since he published a volume in that series, and he got hundreds of pages into the 6th book before he decided he needed to change a lot of what he was doing, that he'd written himself into the wrong direction and had to delete a significant portion of it and start over. So as I wrote today on Cracker Stack, I've decided to choose optimism and see whether book 6 is an improvement, a hard improvement over book 5, which I've described as the Last Jedi of the Red Rising series. So, but that's a small taste of what you'll get at Cracker Stack, and those funds go to help me in my pursuit of creating artwork. This is the kind of thing that is going to ultimately get me out of the truck, clawing my way out of there bit by bit. So that's it for tonight. I've let this one run a little bit longer than I wanted to, but check out the links. I'm also going to put a link to the new Watterson book, so if you guys want to go to Amazon and see what that looks like, you can. Till then, it is after midnight, so I've got to go to work soon. Drive safe. See you guys out there. Thanks.